The story of Jephthah, recorded in Judges 11:29-40, is a tale where triumph turns to tragedy, underscoring themes of faith, impulsiveness, and the profound consequences of rash decisions. It explores the tension between human frailty and divine justice, revealing both the heights of victory and the depths of personal sorrow. Born into rejection, Jephthah rose from exile to become a mighty warrior and judge over Israel. His life story is marked by resilience and faith, but also by an impulsive vow that led to devastating consequences. Called upon by the elders of Gilead during a time of oppression, Jephthah agreed to lead his people against the Ammonites, securing their freedom through God's help. However, his rash promise to sacrifice whatever came out of the door of his house upon his victorious return cast a shadow over his triumph. The first to greet him was his only daughter, a joyful child celebrating her father's success. Bound by his vow, Jephthah faced the heartbreaking reality of his impulsive words. The story delves into human insecurity, misplaced zeal, and the weight of unconsidered promises, while also highlighting his daughter's grace and submission in the face of her tragic fate. Jephthah's tale serves as both a cautionary narrative and a testament to faith, reminding readers of the need for wisdom, restraint, and trust in God's sovereignty without trying to bargain for His favor. Jephthah's story begins in adversity. He was born in Gilead to a prostitute, and though his father acknowledged him, his half-brothers from Gilead's wife rejected him. They drove Jephthah away, declaring that he would have no share in their inheritance. Fleeing to the land of Tob, Jephthah became an outcast. Yet, even in exile, he displayed remarkable leadership and warrior skills, gathering a band of adventurers around him. Despite his rejection, Jephthah's reputation as a valiant fighter grew, and this very skill would later make him indispensable to the people who had cast him out. Years later, the Ammonites, fierce enemies of Israel, began to oppress the people, raiding their lands and threatening their survival. Faced with this relentless threat, the elders of Gilead found themselves at a loss. In their desperation, they turned to Jephthah, the very man they had once cast out. The elders sought him in the land of Tob, where he had been living in exile. They pleaded with him, saying, "Come and be our commander, so we may fight the Ammonites." Jephthah's initial response was understandably skeptical. He confronted them, saying, "Didn't you hate me and drive me away from my father's house? Why come to me now when you're in trouble?" The elders, humbled and desperate, assured him of their sincerity. They promised that if Jephthah led them to victory, he would not only command their forces, but also become their ruler. Jephthah, ever cautious, insisted that they swear before the Lord to keep their promise. With the agreement secured, Jephthah returned to Gilead as their leader, now charged with defending the very people who had once rejected him. His leadership was not born from prestige or privilege, but from necessity and the undeniable hand of God shaping his path. Jephthah's journey to leadership reflected a powerful narrative of redemption. From outcast to commander, his return to Gilead marked the beginning of a pivotal moment in Israel's history, a moment defined by both divine intervention and human imperfection. Before resorting to battle, Jephthah sought to resolve the conflict through diplomacy. He sent messengers to the king of the Ammonites with a straightforward question: "What do you have against us, that you have attacked our land?" The Ammonite king replied, claiming that Israel had taken their land when they came out of Egypt. He demanded the return of the territory stretching from the Arnon to the Jabbok and as far west as the Jordan River. Jephthah, however, was well versed in Israel's history and rejected the claim. In his response, delivered through messengers, he presented a thorough recounting of events. He explained that when Israel left Egypt, they had asked for peaceful passage through the lands of Edom and Moab, but both nations refused. Instead, Israel skirted their territories and reached the land of the Amorites. There, Sihon, king of the Amorites, refused Israel's request for passage and attacked them. In response, God gave Israel victory over Sihon, and they took possession of his land. Jephthah stressed that the land was taken from the Amorites, not the Ammonites, and had been given to Israel by the Lord. Jephthah further pointed out the inconsistency of the Ammonite claim. For 300 years, Israel had lived in this land without challenge from the Ammonites. He asked why they were now demanding it back. Finally, Jephthah appealed to divine justice, saying, "Let the Lord, the judge, decide the dispute this day between the Israelites and the Ammonites." Despite Jephthah's reasoned arguments and appeals to history and faith, the king of the Ammonites refused to back down. Diplomacy had failed, and war became inevitable. With no other recourse, Jephthah prepared to lead Israel into battle, trusting in God to vindicate his people. This chapter in Jephthah's story highlights his wisdom and understanding of Israel's history, as well as his reliance on God as the ultimate arbiter of justice. As Jephthah stood on the brink of battle, the Spirit of the Lord descended upon him, filling him with divine power and confidence to lead Israel against their oppressors. This moment was a clear affirmation that God's favor rested upon him, and victory was within reach. Yet, in an act of misplaced zeal or insecurity, Jephthah made a vow to God, one that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He prayed, "If you give the Ammonites into my hands, whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me when I return in triumph will be the Lord's, and I will sacrifice it as a burnt offering." This promise was impulsive and unnecessary. God's Spirit had already assured his success. There was no need for such a bargain. But perhaps Jephthah, a man shaped by rejection and struggle, felt compelled to make an extraordinary gesture to secure God's favor or to prove his worth as Israel's leader. In his fervor, Jephthah overlooked the potential cost of his vow. His words were vague and poorly considered, leaving the identity of whatever comes out of his house open to devastating possibilities. Despite this, God granted him victory. Empowered by divine strength, Jephthah led Israel to a sweeping triumph over the Ammonites. Town after town fell before him, and the oppressors were thoroughly defeated. Jephthah's victory delivered Israel from their suffering, a moment of national triumph shadowed by the tragic consequences waiting for him at home. Jephthah's vow underscores the dangers of making rash promises to God, even in moments of desperation or enthusiasm. It serves as a powerful reminder that God does not require grand bargains or hasty vows. His grace and faithfulness are sufficient for his purposes to prevail. God granted Jephthah an extraordinary victory. Empowered by divine favor, he led Israel to a decisive triumph over the Ammonites, conquering their forces across 20 towns and securing long-awaited freedom for his people. Jubilant and victorious, Jephthah began the journey home to Mizpah, where he hoped to celebrate his triumph. But as he approached his house, the joy of victory turned to unspeakable sorrow. The first to come out of his home to greet him was not an animal, as he might have hoped or expected, but his only child, his beloved daughter. She came out joyfully, her tambourines ringing and her feet dancing in celebration of her father's success. Unaware of the weight of his vow, she greeted Jephthah with unrestrained delight, a living symbol of the legacy he had fought to protect. But to Jephthah, her appearance was a cruel twist of fate. Seeing her, Jephthah tore his clothes in anguish, a traditional sign of profound grief. He cried out, "Oh no, my daughter! You have brought me down, and I am devastated. I have made a vow to the Lord that I cannot break." His words carried the agony of a father who realized that his thoughtless promise to God had ensnared his only child in a tragedy. Despite the grim circumstances, Jephthah's daughter responded with astonishing grace and courage. She said to her father, "My father, you have given your word to the Lord. Do to me just as you promised, now that the Lord has avenged you of your enemies, the Ammonites." Her selflessness and submission reflected a profound faith in God's will and a deep understanding of the seriousness of vows made to him. However, she made one request: 2 months to roam the hills with her friends and mourn her fate, lamenting the life she would never lead. No marriage, no children, and no continuation of her family line. Jephthah agreed, granting her the time to grieve. After 2 months, she returned to her father, and the vow was fulfilled. The Bible does not provide explicit details about her fate, but the account leaves a lingering sense of sorrow and loss. The Bible solemnly states that Jephthah fulfilled his vow, though the specifics of his daughter's fate remain the subject of theological debate. Some interpretations hold that she was offered as a burnt sacrifice, fulfilling the literal terms of his vow, while others suggest a less drastic but still heart-wrenching outcome, that she was consecrated to lifelong service to God, living in perpetual virginity. If the latter interpretation is correct, Jephthah's daughter spent the remainder of her days dedicated to God's service, unable to marry or bear children. This would have been devastating in a culture where lineage and family heritage were paramount, marking the end of Jephthah's family line. Regardless of the exact nature of her fate, the outcome was undeniably tragic. Jephthah's impulsive vow cost him his only child, the joy and hope of his household. What should have been a time of national celebration for Israel's deliverance became a personal catastrophe, plunging Jephthah and his family into profound sorrow. The story leaves a lasting mark on Israel's history, both as a cautionary tale about the dangers of rash vows and as a reflection of the complexities of faith and devotion in a broken world. It highlights the importance of thoughtful, deliberate commitments to God and underscores the grave consequences of hasty words spoken in moments of zeal or desperation. Through Jephthah's story, readers are reminded to trust in God's sufficiency without attempting to bargain or secure His favor through reckless promises. It serves as a sobering testament to the weight of human decisions and the need for wisdom, humility, and reliance on God's grace. Lessons from Jephthah's story. The danger of rash promises. Jephthah's story serves as a stark warning about the consequences of impulsive vows. His promise, made in a moment of uncertainty, led to unnecessary tragedy. God's power and human insecurity. Jephthah had already been empowered by the Spirit of the Lord, yet he felt compelled to bargain with God. This reflects how human insecurity can lead to actions that undermine trust in divine provision. Faith and submission. The grace and courage of Jephthah's daughter stand out as a remarkable testament to faith. Her acceptance of her fate demonstrates a profound trust in God's sovereignty, even in the face of injustice. The cost of leadership. Jephthah's story highlights the burdens of leadership, where personal sacrifices often accompany public victories. His triumph over the Ammonites was overshadowed by the personal loss he suffered as a consequence of his own words. The story of Jephthah is both a cautionary tale and a poignant reminder of the weight of our words. While Jephthah's faith and leadership delivered Israel from oppression, his impulsive vow brought unnecessary sorrow to his household. Through Jephthah's experience, we are called to exercise wisdom, trust in God's promises without bargaining, and understand the power of our commitments. His daughter's quiet courage and submission stand as a profound example of grace in the face of tragedy, offering lessons that resonate across generations.